She entered quietly, looked at me once, and nothing was the same again. The chamber was vast. It stretched far beyond what the eye could see, filled with smooth, metallic walls that reflected the soft white light from above. The air was still and cold, almost sterile, yet it carried a faint hum, a vibration that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Rows of observation platforms lined the edges, each with its own instruments and holographic displays, blinking and whirring quietly. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved carefully between the platforms, their steps echoing softly against the smooth floor. Some were tall and slender, with translucent skin that shimmered faintly, while others were compact, with thick scales and eyes like polished stones. All of them shared one common trait: they were highly focused, always watching, always measuring. And then she appeared. It was not with a crash or a shout, as some of the human delegations had done before. She did not burst through the doorway with heavy steps or loud demands. She entered quietly, one foot in front of the other, soft and deliberate. She carried no tools, no devices, no signs of authority. Her clothes were simple, a muted shade of gray, but they seemed to move naturally with her, like she belonged to the space itself. The air shifted subtly around her, not because she forced it, but because the atmosphere seemed to notice her presence. The alien observer, known as Valar, had seen hundreds of species enter chambers like this. Most of them were loud, aggressive, or obsequious. They tried to impress, to scare, or to hide. Most failed in predictable ways. Yet this human, she was different. She did not look to impress, nor to dominate. She did not even appear afraid. She merely moved, quietly, and then stopped. Her eyes, deep and unassuming, met Valar's. She looked once, just once, and in that single glance, everything shifted. Valar felt it first in the mind. A twinge of something unidentifiable, a ripple through thoughts that had always been precise and measured. The instruments on the observation platform flickered, though no one else seemed to notice. The air itself seemed heavier, not because of weight, but because of awareness. For a moment, Valar forgot to record. For a moment, the alien felt... what, exactly? Not fear, not excitement, not anger. It was something quieter, sharper, understanding, maybe. Or the sense that the universe had just added a note it had never known before. Other aliens noticed, too. A tall, thin creature with limbs like flexible rods tilted its head, sensing a disturbance in the usual patterns. A compact, scale-covered alien leaned closer to its console, adjusting readings that had not required adjustment for centuries. Something about this human, Valar realized, was unprecedented. The woman took another step forward, slow and deliberate, until she was fully in the chamber. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. She looked around, not with curiosity that demanded answers, but with quiet observation. Every motion was measured, yet natural. No tension, no need to prove herself. The aliens, Valar included, had been trained to expect patterns. Every species followed some, either domination, submission, performance, or deception. But this human did not follow any known pattern. She did not perform, nor strategize, nor hide. She simply moved as though she belonged. And perhaps, Valar thought, that was exactly what made her dangerous. For hours, the chamber continued its usual activity. Aliens ran simulations, recorded readings, and whispered to one another in high-pitched or low-toned clicks that only their species could hear. Humans normally reacted, often with confusion or mimicry, to the constant scanning and monitoring, but this one human, this quiet woman, did not. She walked slowly along the observation platform, her eyes tracking the instruments, the lights, the aliens, yet never with panic or eagerness. She paused only once, briefly, to tilt her head at a display. It showed projected images of the galaxy along with calculations of planetary movements and social structures. "You measure everything," she said softly. Her voice was calm, not loud enough to disrupt, not quiet enough to be ignored. It was simply there. Valar turned, startled. Few humans spoke clearly in such settings. Even fewer spoke directly to the observer. The words carried no threat, no plea, no attempt to manipulate. They were merely a recognition. You exist. I see you. "I measure," Valar said carefully. "It is the purpose of my station." She nodded. "And yet you are measuring them?" she said, gesturing toward the other aliens. "Not me?" Valar's antenna twitched slightly. "I do not understand." "You are always measuring," she explained. "Always trying to know, to predict. But do you notice that I am not trying to hide or dominate? I am simply present." Valar realized something. Bialsa, humans, it seemed, did not follow the rules that other species did. They did not seek to control through intimidation or submission. They simply existed, and by existing, they forced the observer to confront something unfamiliar. Time stretched. The woman moved slowly, examining consoles and instruments as though she were curious but never intrusive. Occasionally, she would look directly at an alien and smile, not mockingly, not condescendingly, but simply with acknowledgement. Even the most rigid aliens faltered under her gaze, unaccustomed to being seen without expectation. Valar's sensors recorded fluctuations that could not be explained. Heart rates, though alien, not human, shifted in rhythm, brain activity. Their equivalent pulsed with new patterns. The very structure of the chamber seemed to respond to her presence. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was perhaps only minutes, the woman stopped at the center of the platform. She turned slowly to Valar. "Why do you look at me so?" she asked. Valar paused. "You are unexpected." She smiled faintly. "Good. I am not here to perform. I am here to exist, to observe as you do." Valar did not know how to respond. No species had ever approached observation with such simplicity. Most would either flee, manipulate, or attempt to dominate. Humans, it seemed, were capable of none of these predictable behaviors. And yet, in this simplicity, there was power. Quiet, subtle, undeniable power. The rest of the aliens continued their work, though fewer glanced at her now. Some returned to simulations, whispering among themselves, trying to reconcile the presence of a species that could exist without seeking approval. Others simply watched, unable to tear their attention away. Valar realized the chamber itself had changed, or perhaps not the chamber, but perception itself. When a species exists without pretense, the observer must confront its own assumptions. Every measurement, every prediction, every rule that governed alien interactions suddenly seemed incomplete, as if a hidden variable had been introduced. The human's gaze, calm and unwavering, carried a subtle insistence. "Recognize me as I am." Valar understood that this insistence did not demand obedience or submission. It demanded acknowledgement of existence. And for an observer trained to categorize, predict, and control, this was the most difficult challenge of all. As the observation continued, Valar began to record the anomaly in careful, precise notes. Not measurements, not predictions, not data to compare or manipulate, but the simple fact: a human can exist without forcing the world to adapt, and by doing so compel the universe itself to notice. Hours later, the human finally turned to leave. She walked back the same quiet path she had taken entering, her presence leaving no disturbance in the air, no ripple in the walls. She paused at the doorway and looked back once more. The glance was brief. Yet it carried weight, recognition, understanding, possibility. Then she was gone. The chamber returned to its usual rhythm. The other aliens resumed their measurements, their calculations, and their whispered debates. Yet something had shifted. Valar felt it most keenly. A simple glance, one presence, had introduced a variable that could not be removed. Nothing about the world, or the way it would be observed, would ever be the same again. Valar recorded one final note that day. Species unpredictable, yet power lies not in force, but in presence. Observation will continue. Impact unknown. And somewhere deep inside, Valar understood. The quietest intrusions can echo far longer than the loudest ones. The next day, the chamber felt different. The usual hum of machines and chatter of aliens carried the same rhythm, but Valar noticed subtle changes. The sensors, which had been precise and predictable yesterday, now recorded minor fluctuations that were not immediately explainable. The readings indicated something strange. An unmeasurable awareness had entered the space. It was not physical, not chemical, but something perceptual. Something that slipped through even the most advanced instruments. The human delegation had returned, but the woman from yesterday was not with them at first. Other humans moved with caution, carrying tools, recording devices, and notebooks. They followed predictable patterns: scan, measure, explain, submit. Yet the aliens noticed the absence of the quiet one, the one who had disrupted expectation simply by existing. Valar studied the other humans and realized something startling. None of them carried the same force, the same silent authority as the woman. She was not stronger, faster, or smarter in measurable ways. She had no weapons, no advanced devices, no visible advantage, and yet her presence had shifted perception. By midday, the quiet woman entered. Once again, she did not announce herself. She did not hurry. Her footsteps were soft, yet they seemed to touch every corner of the room simultaneously, like a gentle wave brushing against a calm shore. Valar could feel the chamber respond to her. Aliens adjusted posture subtly. Instruments flickered, some readings momentarily lost their baseline. She stopped in front of a group of aliens who were discussing human behavior with visible tension. One of them, a large six-limbed creature with a head like a crystal, paused mid-sentence. The humans usually explained themselves, offered information, or tried to charm or threaten the observers. But this human stood silently, observing. "You measure everything," she said quietly, not at anyone in particular, but so it reached all present. "But do you notice anything that matters?" The aliens froze. Valar tilted antennae, analyzing the statement. It was not a challenge, not a command, not a question meant to expose weakness. Yet it carried subtle pressure to acknowledge, to reconsider, to pay attention beyond instruments. "I do not understand," Valar admitted. The words felt inadequate, yet they were honest. Few aliens would admit such vulnerability. "You watch patterns," the human continued. "You record, predict, classify. You expect reactions, but not existence itself. I am here, not to perform, not to obey, not to dominate, simply to exist." Her presence was calm, yet every alien in the room felt a weight of attention that was not imposed. It was reflected. It was mutual. She did not take it, she simply mirrored it. And in that reflection, the aliens experienced something entirely new, the awareness of being watched not as data, but as beings with choice. Valar realized that humans were unlike any other species in the galaxy. Other species either sought control, submission, or chaos. Humans, it seemed, could exist without these compulsions. They did not have to impress. They did not have to dominate. They did not need to hide weakness. They simply were. The observation instruments recorded slight anomalies in neurological activity of the aliens, but they could not explain the pattern. Every measurement had expected variables: temperature, movement, vocal tone, light reflection, but none of these captured the true impact. The woman's existence created an effect that was not measurable, a ripple through perception itself. Hours passed. The woman moved slowly through the chamber, pausing now and then to watch a display, or look at an alien, or glance at a human colleague. Her gestures were minimal, but precise, almost like brushstrokes across a blank canvas. Each action drew subtle attention from those around her. Conversations slowed. Discussions halted mid-sentence. Even Valar's recordings became tentative, interrupted by thoughts that had never existed before. The sense of humility, of curiosity without expectation, of power without demand. One of the younger aliens, usually eager to dominate the conversation, approached her. "Why do you not perform?" it asked in a voice that cracked slightly under the strain of unaccustomed inquiry. The woman looked at it directly, without judgment. Because performance is not always necessary. Some things exist, and that is enough. The alien did not understand the words fully. Its species valued display, proof, demonstration of strength or intelligence. Yet somehow, the words struck deeper than comprehension. It felt a disturbance in the usual hierarchy. It realized that proof was not always needed. Recognition could exist without it. Valar noted this. Every species that entered this chamber had an instinct to dominate, to defend, to signal. Humans, however, seemed to reject these instincts naturally. And the quiet woman embodied this rejection. She walked to a console projecting holograms of planetary systems, stars, and alien settlements. Her fingers hovered just above the interface, observing patterns that had taken years for the aliens to calculate. She did not manipulate the data, did not rearrange the projections. She simply watched. "Why do you watch without changing anything?" asked one of the aliens, unable to contain curiosity. "Because observation alone reveals truth," she replied. "Sometimes interference hides what already exists. I watch to see the world, not to control it." Valar's thoughts trembled. The galaxy had been built on interference, control, domination, prediction. Every species followed rules that relied on manipulation, force, or fear. Humans, it seemed, could bypass all of this simply by observing. And observation, when combined with existence, held a quiet, unimaginable power. The humans' colleagues began to notice subtle changes as well. Humans are social, they realized, but not in ways that demanded attention. Instead, her quiet calm influenced others, making them less defensive, less reactive. Even humans who normally feared alien scrutiny began to mirror her poise, discovering the strength of stillness. Valar studied her carefully. The alien had always believed that influence required effort, projection of energy, force, or intelligence, yet here was a species that influenced simply by being. Quiet, calm, unwavering. Influence without force. That was not just different, it was revolutionary. By evening, Valar noticed a change in the entire chamber. The usual air of measured tension was replaced with a subtle curiosity. Aliens whispered to one another, exchanging observations about the human species. But the whispers were different. They contained respect, intrigue, and a hint of uncertainty. Humans had been studied, measured, and predicted countless times, yet never had an observer felt the weight of simply acknowledging them. The woman finally paused in the center of the room and looked directly at Valar. "You study species," she said softly. "But do you study what makes them alive? What makes them choose? Hope? Wonder?" Valar hesitated. No observer had asked that question in millennia. Observation was about structure, not meaning. Measurement, not wonder. And yet, the question settled in the mind like a seed. "I do not know," Valar admitted, honestly. The truth felt strange, yet liberating. It was the first admission of uncertainty in centuries. The human smiled faintly, not mockingly, not condescendingly. "Then perhaps there is something you might learn from watching without trying to control." And in that moment, the alien understood something profound. Humans did not measure power in dominance. They did not seek influence through fear. They did not demand recognition. They simply existed, and by existing, they compelled recognition in others. It was subtle, quiet, and infinitely more powerful than any display of force. As the human delegation left the chamber that evening, her steps were as quiet as they had been when she entered. Yet the room itself seemed different. Valar felt a shift in thought, a new awareness that could not be measured but could be felt. The instruments recorded no change. The lights, the walls, and the air remained the same. Yet perception itself had altered. Valar recorded in the log, "Species unpredictable. They do not perform, dominate, or hide. Influence exists without force." Observation alone can alter perception. Further study required. For the first time, the alien realized that not all power could be measured. Not all influence could be calculated. Some things existed quietly, without expectation, and yet could change the world entirely. And the quiet human woman, she was the living proof. Valar stood on the observation platform, staring at the logs that no instrument could fully explain. Every reading had been normal. Temperatures, light, vibrations, all within expected ranges. Yet the data failed to capture the subtle shifts the human woman had created. She had not performed any action, yet every alien in the chamber, even the most experienced, had been unsettled. Not with fear, not with anger, but with awareness. An awareness that had no immediate source. Later, the Leadership Council of Valar's species convened. The chamber for the council was vast, domed, and filled with holographic projections of every species the council had ever observed. They measured speed, strength, intelligence, aggression, and communication. All were predictable, measurable, categorizable. And yet, for the first time in millennia, the council faced an unknown variable. "She does not follow patterns," Valar reported, voice steady but unusual in its hesitancy. "Humans are unpredictable. Not in aggression, not in deception. In calm. In presence." One of the council elders, a massive creature with mirrored scales and 6 eyes, tilted its head. "Calm? Presence? Explain." Valar hesitated. How could one describe a ripple through perception, a shift in thought, a subtle rearrangement of assumptions? She exists without proving herself, without dominance, without submission, without trickery. Yet her presence forces recognition. It changes perception without action. The elder hissed softly, a sound that signified deep thought. "Dangerous." "Dangerous?" Valar repeated, startled. "Yes," said the elder. "Not because of attack, not because of weapons, but because she carries something we cannot measure, cannot contain. It spreads quietly, and it alters the minds of those who witness it." Other council members whispered in clicks and hums. The discussion was different from usual. No one argued over numbers or strategy. Instead, they debated conceptually. How could a species be so powerful without the usual tools of dominance? How could a species influence without force? Valar continued. It is not just her. Humans, as a species, carry this same quality. I observed it in her colleagues. Not as strongly, but the potential exists. They carry individuality without fragmentation, empathy without surrender, acceptance of uncertainty without despair. It is unnatural for what we know. One of the younger council members clicked nervously. Unnatural, dangerous. But how? They do not attack, they do not control. How can this be dangerous? Valar paused. Because influence is not always measured by force. They challenge assumptions. They make observers question the rules of interaction. They force thought without speaking, without commanding, without demanding. Their presence alone disrupts the predictable patterns of behavior we rely on to maintain order. The council went silent. No species had ever done this. All had sought to control or evade control. Every species followed patterns that could be predicted, except humans. They were an anomaly. Quiet, still, yet capable of altering the most complex systems simply by existing. And yet they are small, said one elder finally, voice low. Physically, technologically, nothing compared to us. And yet they make the observers falter. That is the danger. Yes, Valar agreed. Their strength is conceptual, philosophical, subtle, and the most difficult threat. It cannot be contained. It cannot be measured. It cannot be attacked in the traditional sense. The council debated late into the cycle. They discussed containment, observation, and potential manipulation. But every plan felt inadequate. Humans were not predictable, not controllable. They did not react to fear, dominance, or manipulation in expected ways. The more the council tried to understand them, the less certain they became. Finally, one elder, whose scales reflected the chamber like liquid metal, spoke. Then we must study them differently. Not as subjects, not as prey, but as phenomena. As a force that exists quietly, yet profoundly. We must observe their impact without attempting to control it, or risk being overwhelmed by what we cannot predict. Valar nodded. That was exactly what had been happening. The human woman, by simply existing, had forced a shift in understanding. A shift that no instrument, no calculation, no plan could reverse. The following day, Valar returned to the chamber where the humans had been observed. The woman had arrived, quietly as always. She moved among the aliens with a calm assurance, touching nothing, taking nothing, saying little. Her presence alone carried weight. Valar realized that this human did not seek attention, nor approval, nor recognition. And yet, every alien present could not ignore her. Valar watched her interact with other humans. She did not dominate or lead in obvious ways. She did not force opinion or command action. Instead, she walked, observed, and sometimes, in moments almost imperceptible, smiled or nodded at someone. That small gesture changed their posture, their confidence, their focus. Valar realized this was the source of their influence. Not orders, not power, not technology, but acknowledgement, a recognition of presence. It was simple, subtle, and extraordinarily effective. Later, the human paused before a projection showing the distribution of intelligence across nearby planets. Her eyes moved slowly across the glowing points. Then she spoke softly. You measure the stars. You measure life. But do you measure possibility? Do you see what could be or only what is? Possibility. Humans considered outcomes not only based on prediction, but also on imagination, empathy, and hope. No species had combined these qualities without obsession, without strategy, without control. Humans had mastered it by simply existing. What you call dangerous, she continued, looking around at the council through the observation channel, is not threat. It is awareness. It is freedom. It is choice. They exist quietly, yet they carry influence beyond expectation. That is why you cannot ignore them. Valar recorded her words carefully. Influence beyond expectation. That was precisely the problem. Other species had power in measurable ways. Humans had power in unmeasurable ways, influence without display. Change without action, calm without weakness. The council would spend cycles trying to comprehend it. They would debate containment, observation, and prediction, yet nothing they had used before could prepare them for this. Humans challenged assumptions not by breaking rules, but by refusing to follow them in the first place. That night, Valar returned alone to the observation chamber. The instruments were quiet. The chamber reflected the dim light like a mirror. And yet, the ripple of her presence lingered. Valar realized that the danger humans carried was not something that could be neutralized or destroyed. It was inherent. It was part of their being, and it was quietly contagious. Valar thought of the human woman. She had not acted heroically. She had not fought. She had not conquered. She had simply walked into a room, looked once, and existed. And in doing so, she had changed perception, first of Valar, then of the entire council, and perhaps, in time, of the galaxy itself. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most aggressive, and yet, in every way that mattered, they carried something no other species had mastered: the ability to exist fully, calmly, and without performance, while reshaping the minds of those who observed them. Valar realized that this quiet human was not a single anomaly. She was an expression of an entire species' potential. Every human carried the same capacity: presence without domination, empathy without surrender, individuality without fragmentation. And the more Valar studied them, the more it became clear the galaxy had never faced anything like this before. By the end of the cycle, the council had reached a tentative conclusion. Humans could not be controlled. They could not be predicted. They could not be manipulated in ways the council had previously used with other species. Their power was conceptual, philosophical, subtle, and quietly unstoppable, and that made them the most dangerous species the council had ever observed. But Valar, reflecting in silence, knew the truth. Humans were dangerous not because they sought to destroy, dominate, or conquer. They were dangerous because they reminded every observer of their own limitations. They were dangerous because they carried freedom, presence, and possibility. And in that quiet danger, the galaxy might find something it had never expected: a lesson in humility, awareness, and change. Valar recorded the final note of the cycle. Humans carry a danger that is invisible, yet unavoidable. It is not force, it is presence. It is not conquest, it is awareness. The species does not follow patterns. Observation alone confirms influence. Study must continue. Containment is impossible. Adaptation is required, and for the first time in Valar's long life of observation, the alien felt awe, not fear. Not superiority, not triumph. Awe, the kind that changes the observer forever. The human woman had left again, walking quietly, leaving no trace but a lingering ripple in thought and perception. And Valar understood deeply. Nothing about the galaxy would ever be the same again. Time passed in quiet waves. The human delegation had left the observation chamber for the day, but the effects of their presence lingered like an invisible current. Valar walked among the instruments, scanning readings, adjusting sensors, but nothing explained what had changed. The air itself felt different. The chamber felt heavier, not in weight, but in awareness. Every alien in the facility carried a subtle tension, a question they could not fully define. The Leadership Council had convened once again. Their discussion was no longer about measurement, control, or containment. Instead, they debated the strange, subtle force that humans carried, a force neither destructive nor predictable, yet undeniably powerful. "They exist without effort," said one elder, its multiple eyes reflecting softly in the light. "They do not follow the rules we expect, yet their influence is unavoidable." Valar nodded. "It is more than influence. It is presence, recognition, choice. They observe without imposing, yet compel acknowledgement." Another elder clicked nervously. "Dangerous. If not in a physical way, then in a way we cannot defend against." "Yes," Valar replied. "They force thought. They force reflection. They expose limitations in every species they encounter. That is their strength, and the challenge we must face." The council fell silent, and for the first time, no species attempted to dominate the conversation. The discussion shifted to understanding, not control. Observation, not enforcement. Recognition, not manipulation. Meanwhile, back in the chamber, the human woman returned the next cycle. She moved as always, quietly, deliberately, with a calm that seemed to fill the space around her. Valar watched from a distance, noticing how every alien she passed adjusted slightly, not out of fear, nor obligation, but out of instinctive awareness. The humans had been taught many things about alien behavior: how to respond, how to influence, how to survive. Yet this woman seemed to know something beyond instruction. She did not attempt to command attention or to impress. She simply moved, and the room adjusted around her. Valar followed her silently. The woman paused at a console projecting holographic images of nearby star systems. She studied them carefully, her expression serene, as if contemplating not just the positions of planets, but the possibilities they represented. "You look at all of this," she said softly, speaking more to herself than anyone else. "But what do you see?" Valar tilted its head. "I see order. Patterns. Predictable behaviors." She shook her head slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You see what is. I wonder what could be." It was the same lesson Valar had felt the first day, yet somehow deeper now. Possibility. Humans measured more than data. They measured potential, choice, and consequence. They understood uncertainty without fear. They embraced change without desperation. The other aliens began to notice. They watched quietly, unsure how to interpret the subtle shifts in their own thinking. Their usual reliance on calculation and prediction faltered. Even the council members, long accustomed to control and certainty, found themselves reflecting in ways they had never allowed. Later, the human paused before a group of young aliens, learning to observe human behavior. She spoke softly. "You measure us as subjects, but to understand, you must observe without expectation. Do not try to change us. Watch, recognize, learn. That is the beginning of true understanding." Her words spread quietly through the ranks. The younger aliens adjusted their methods. They began to notice differences not through measurement alone, but through attention, reflection, and empathy. Valar realized something profound. Humans did not need to assert power. They did not need to fight or compete. Their very existence, and the way they acknowledged others without demanding acknowledgement, reshaped behavior. influence without force, change without imposition. That was the legacy of humanity. Days turned into cycles. The leadership council began to adapt. Rituals became less rigid, discussions more open, and observation more reflective. The aliens learned to pause, to notice, to consider not just what was measurable, but what was meaningful. Valar recorded it carefully. The presence of humans has altered perception. Control is no longer the measure of influence. Observation with recognition, calm with awareness, choice with empathy. These are forces that cannot be ignored. Adaptation is necessary. The human woman's final act before leaving was simple, almost imperceptible. She paused at the doorway, looked back at Valar, and smiled. No words, no commands. Just acknowledgement. That single glance carried weight beyond calculation. It said, "You see me. You understand me. And by understanding, you are changed." The chamber emptied. Humans departed, leaving no trace beyond the lingering effect of recognition. Machines continued to hum. Instruments blinked. Yet something had shifted irreversibly. The aliens themselves were altered, not physically, but mentally. The calm, reflective presence of the human woman had introduced a variable that could not be erased. Valar lingered in thought. Humanity's power was unlike anything the galaxy had known. They did not conquer, dominate, or manipulate. They existed. They acknowledged. They inspired thought and reflection simply by being. The Council issued a new directive. Humans were to be observed not as potential threats, nor as subjects, but as phenomena, examples of what a species could achieve without coercion or aggression. Observation became not control, but learning. Recognition replaced dominance. Empathy replaced expectation. And for Valar, personally, nothing would ever be the same. The alien had spent millennia observing, measuring, and predicting behavior. But humans had introduced a concept that could not be measured or predicted: the quiet strength of existing fully, calmly, and with awareness. Even as Valar returned to routine observation, the ripple remained. The younger aliens, inspired by what they had seen, began to approach other species differently. Observation was no longer about control. Dialogue became subtler, questions more reflective, and curiosity deeper. The Leadership Council noted the change with a mixture of awe and cautious respect. Humans were not a threat in the traditional sense. Their danger lay in their example. They carried a quiet power that forced all who encountered them to reconsider assumptions, rethink strategies, and recognize limitations. And that power, Valar understood, was enduring. Months later, when the human delegation departed for good, the chamber remained quiet. The instruments registered no anomaly. The lights continued their soft hum, and the air returned to its standard temperature and vibration. Yet the perception of those who had witnessed the humans had shifted permanently. Every alien who had seen the quiet woman understood that some species could change the universe without raising a hand or making a sound. Valar looked at the logs one final time. The words of the human woman echoed in its memory. Observe without expectation. Recognize without judgment. Learn without interference. It was simple. It was profound, and it would guide observation for cycles to come. The galaxy had not been conquered by humans, nor had it been intimidated. Humanity had arrived quietly, observed deeply, and reminded all who encountered them that true strength often lay not in domination, but in presence. And in that quiet truth, the universe began to shift. Valar closed the log and stepped onto the observation platform. The chamber stretched out, unchanged in form, yet completely transformed in meaning. Instruments hummed, holograms projected, and aliens moved about their tasks. Yet awareness had been altered, perspective had been expanded. Humanity had demonstrated that the smallest, quietest actions could leave the largest, most lasting impressions. And for Valar, for the Council, and for the galaxy, nothing would ever be the same again. Humans had arrived. Quietly. Observed. And in one glance, changed everything.